Hi everyone and welcome to the latest edition of Tutor Talk. Today we're going to be talking about the Specialist Advanced or SA level exams, and I am joined today by my colleague Darren. Darren, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Darren Michaels, and I teach the three general insurance subjects, so SP7, SP8, and SA3, which I guess we're going to be talking a little bit about today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's worth saying that all the advice we're going to be talking about today is very general. And obviously, if you wanted something a bit more subject specific, then the individual tutors in the tutorials for those subjects would be able to give that subject specific advice. So, first of all, Darren, why are the essay exams different to the other later subjects?
Okay, well, I think first of all, it's worth bearing in mind that they build on the relevant specialist principal subjects, so the SP subjects, that will underpin them. But I think here in particular, the examiners want you to be able to, well, demonstrate a few things. So first of all, they want you to demonstrate your understanding of some of the more complex aspects of the particular specialist area. They want you to kind of show that you can apply the principles in the core reading to some more complex scenarios. And in some cases, they even might ask you to actually recommend some sort of solution or course of action to take. I think it's fair to say that the essay exams tend to be a lot more weighted towards higher order questions rather than perhaps the application and knowledge based questions that you see in some of the earlier exams. Um, Sometimes examiners actually like to pose very unfamiliar scenarios, and they like to test things that actually aren't in the core reading. Sometimes these can be completely fictitious scenarios that they've just made up for the purpose of an exam question, but often they might be actually underlying them, might be based on kind of real life, real world type situation there as well. So you might be able to draw some parallels and things like that with something you have seen before.
Okay, how can we prepare for those questions based on real events?
Well, I think the first thing I would recommend is that you do a lot of reading around the subject. So do lots of background reading. I think there's a couple of main reasons I'd suggest this. First of all, you might just be lucky and you might just come across something that actually comes up in the exam itself. But I think more likely, you might be able to draw some parallels between what you've read about and what's being asked in the question, and you can apply some of those techniques that you've seen used elsewhere, or ideas, problem solving, etc., to what's actually described in the particular question. There's often sometimes topical questions, so it's good to be prepared for these by kind of keeping up to date with what's topical in the industry.
So, where can we get ideas for those topical questions?
Oh, Sarah, that's a good question. I've got a few thoughts on this one. First of all, there are normally some ideas in the course notes, so that's perhaps the best place to start. You could have a look at some of the discussion forums on our website. Some of the tutors will share some suggestions in this particular tutorials for your subject. The Actuary magazine, that's always a good place to start looking. You might find some materials out there from, say, an IFOA or other public conferences that could be relevant. Regional society meetings, like SIAS, for example, is Staple Inn Actuarial Society, but there's other regional actuarial societies that might have relevant presentations from time to time. Institute sessional meetings. I think compared to when I studied for these exams, and possibly you as well, Sarah,
Yeah.
I think people are very lucky these
Yeah.
days because there's an enormous plethora of webinars, presentations, videos all out there online. Worth talking to some of your colleagues because they might have some ideas as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I think another thing I would say on this one is that background reading really can take a lot of variety of different forms, and I don't think you just have to limit yourself to just reading thick technical papers. Look out for things like podcasts or as well. I mean, listening might be more your thing. You could even perhaps listen to things like that in the car or something like that, as long as, of course, you keep focusing on the road as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Good for doing when perhaps you couldn't do more traditional forms of study. If you're walking or something like that, that's always good,
Yeah,
isn't it?
that's a really good idea. If you're going
Yeah.
for a walk to try and, get some fresh air and stuff, listen to a podcast at the
Yeah.
same time.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier on that there's more of an emphasis in the essay exams on higher order questions. How does that impact how we should prepare for these exams?
Okay, yeah. Well, I think probably the thing I would say here above everything else is that past paper question practice is probably more important than ever for these exams. And it's pretty much, it's always been important for every actuarial exam, but I think it's even more important here. So I really recommend you do as many past exam questions as possible. Perhaps to start with, I think it's a good idea to attempt questions sort of topic by topic, so that if you attempt a lot of questions on a particular topic, then you start to get to know the sorts of points that might come up, and you can then start practicing how you tailor the generic points that come up to the specific scenarios in the question.
Yeah.
It's quite often that by not tailoring your answers to the scenario in the question, you might be more likely to fail. I think the examiners tend to be very hot on this, in my experience. And remember that all of the information in the question, including, say, any numbers or anything like that, tends to be there for a reason, and you might need to make sure that you use it in your answer. Um, as well as attempting questions, I think you should try and do as many as you can under exam conditions and actually get them marked. Few perhaps thoughts here. For mock exams, you could, of course, have them marked by ACTED accredited markers. They'll give you some objective feedback on your performance and also some suggestions on how you can improve for next time. For other past papers, maybe you could ask a colleague to help mark them. Maybe you could even partner up with someone at work that's sitting the same subject and then maybe mark each other's attempts, for example. You could maybe even get together before you even attempt the question and discuss how you're going to approach them.
Yeah, I used to do that. I had a colleague who was doing the essay at the same time as me, and we'd go and meet for lunch and discuss exam questions. But it's another way of getting ideas, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
all help.
that's a good idea. At
Yeah,
least you've got the lunch there to kind of soften
yeah,
the blow a little bit.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Motivation to get through it. Um,
Exactly.
the questions in the essay exams can sometimes be for higher numbers of marks as well. It can be hard to generate enough ideas for those marks. Have you got any tips on that idea generation?
Yeah, so I think one of the things to look out for is some of the ideas and words that kind of pop up time and time again in the exams, and they begin to kind of set off a sort of a whole cascade of ideas one after the other, and you can kind of use things like word association techniques and the like. It's probably worth having things like big issues checklists that can give you some structure for some of the larger questions. You might kind of generate these themselves. Maybe you think through some of the chapter headings, including some of those from the SP subjects, or maybe even thinking about things like the key stakeholders of an insurance company or a pension scheme or whatever it is you might be thinking about. It's worth definitely having these sorts of ideas and any other checklists and other tools for generating ideas, all as part of the reference materials you might have for the day of the exam. Um, and something else I'd say as well is whenever you're answering a question, it's always good practice to kind of make a point, explain why it's relevant to the scenario in the question, because basically the examiners aren't mind readers. And if you don't explain why it's relevant, then you won't get the mark that's probably there for doing so. Then you could give an example if you can think of one, and then maybe move on and tell them something else.
Yeah.
And it's worth bearing in mind, I think, as well, that it's a good idea to have a balanced answer. So considering an opposing view to the one that you've suggested is another good way of generating ideas. So, for example, it's okay to say something like, X, Y, Z might increase and Y, and then later on, almost in the same answer to that question or a later part, say that it might decrease and why. I think some of the students I've talked to think, oh, they can't do this because it almost feels like they're contradicting themselves. But I think as long as you explain things clearly, you should be okay. I mean,
Yeah.
by definition, the essay exams kind of test the grayer areas of the course, and things aren't always just black or white. Um,
It shows your rounded knowledge of the course as well, doesn't it? Appreciating something from all angles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm sure some of these sort of subject specific techniques are discussed and practiced further in the specific tutorials for your subject.
Is there anything else that makes studying for those essay, that last exam, more difficult?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's worth acknowledging that by the time you get to the essay exams, you're probably more senior at work with more responsibilities on your shoulder. It may become a bit harder to take study leave. You might have more demands on your time from your home life as well. So you've got lots of different conflicting priorities to manage. Most of those you probably can't change, so it's probably worth recognizing that. But at the same time, of course, it's important to give sufficient time to preparing for the exam,
Yeah.
not to underestimate that time and how much time you need for preparation. Perhaps worth remembering, it's probably your last exam, and maybe that will give you the extra incentive and motivate you to give you one last push and get over the line.
Yeah, absolutely. It does get tricky. It does get hard as you get further through the exams. Have we got any specific advice we could give to anyone resitting their essay?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, I think the first thing I would say would be to try something different to what you've done before. Try something else because maybe what you've done previously hasn't worked. So definitely do even more question practice. There's no shortage of past exam questions to attempt. Think about whether there's any unused ACTED resources out there that you might be able to make use of, such as, for example, the additional mock pack with 2 further mock exams that you can have marked again.
Yeah.
Perhaps check the ACTED website because that will give you a list of what's available in your specific subject.
Yeah. Great. Excellent advice, Darren. Thank you ever so much. And obviously, as Darren said, we've got more advice and more information on what's available for each specific essay on our website. And we'll pop a link to that in the description for the video as well. So if you are sitting your essay, perhaps it is your last exam, good luck. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Bye, everyone, and good luck.